where we have a spotlight on inclusion in adult education. So very soon we are going to hand over to our co-event coordinators at Léargas to do a little bit of context setting. This is a little bit of a different agenda for this session because we're shortening today's session, so we'll all be finished a little bit early, which is great. But we're going to have some context setting from Léargas. We're going to have an overview of Erasmus Plus and inclusion in adult education. Then we have our panel discussion, and we'll have time then for Q&A afterwards, where the experts from Léargas are going to stay on and answer any questions that you might have about adult education, Erasmus Plus, and the different types of funding that might be available. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Deirdre Finlay from Léargas, who's going to give a little bit of an overview of, or some context setting from Léargas, I suppose, about adult education and what are the policy priorities from the Erasmus Plus project. So Deirdre, do you want to, when you're ready, you can unmute yourself and hop in?
Yeah, hi, good morning everyone, and thanks Emma. My name is Deirdre and I am the program manager here at Léargas, managing the program support and development team. So the program support and development team are likely to be the staff that you would engage with, or you could be already engaging with if you were exploring Erasmus Plus or exploring opportunities or pathways into the program. So in terms of Léargas, where we've been working for over 30 years in the area of international exchange. And just this summer, we launched our new strategy. And I think for context setting in that regard, it's interesting for you to know perhaps that our strategy centers on 3 areas. First is people. So people matter. So people such as yourselves, of course, the people that we reach through our programs, of course, our staff. So all the people that are touched by Erasmus Plus or indeed the European Solidarity Corps are central to our work and they're a priority for us. So just for you to know that. The second thing, or the second priority for us, is partnerships. And thinking about this morning's event, we work closely in partnership with many different organizations, and we partner as well with the beneficiaries or the organizations that receive funding. We see them as our partners. So we are very much about supporting and developing strong relationships and finding a way to get the most from any project and for it to fit perfectly within the program. And the third priority area for us is programs, and every project leads into the bigger picture of the program, what the program is doing nationally and what the program is doing in Europe and what the program is achieving, in this case, for example, in terms of adult education and what it's achieving in terms of inclusion. So I just wanted to kind of, I suppose, set that context that Léargas is so much more, I think, than an organization that administers funding and monitors it. We have so much more to offer you, and I will get to that in a second in terms of how you can engage with us beyond funding applications and that. So I said before that, just again to mention it, that we partner with the Wheel. I think since about 2017, we've been closely working with the Wheel, which is fantastic. I used to work for the Wheel, so I'm totally sold on the power of civil society representation and on the power of civil society networking. So I hope that you'll get as much as you can from today's event when it comes to that. And then thinking about adult education, well, I don't really have a whole lot prepared on the policy, Emma, because I think the policy nationally and at European level is probably something that you may know already quite a lot about yourselves. But for us, in terms of how we see the program life cycle started in 2021 and it will continue to 2027. And during that period, we have ambition. And we have a lot of excitement about adult education in terms of how it can be more inclusive. I think it has been so far, but in the new program now, we're looking to see even more organizations who are expert in community education and are relevant in adult education to access Erasmus Plus projects. And that's something that Gemma and Jane on the call today can talk to you about. We also have a new aspect to it called learner mobility, which is really about the learners themselves having an opportunity to travel or to meet with other learners. And I think that's a really exciting aspect of the new Erasmus Plus Adult Education program. And you might hear more about that today as well. Also the adult education field in Erasmus Plus provides opportunities for professional development. So for staff working in adult education to learn and develop their skills. And that's so important for the people that ultimately we want to reach, that we are strong and that we are good educators. So that's really exciting. So I think in terms of the program nationally, this very much fits with the national policy around FET. And that's something that we know our program addresses. So I would encourage you may already have funding nationally, think about what you can perhaps achieve within Erasmus Plus that plays into that. So that's it for me, but there are two things I'd like you to think about after today's event or at the end of the event, and I'm sure our staff will mention it. But the first thing is called IPALE. So as I said before, Léargas is so much more than an agency that manages funds. We have places where you can learn and you can get information without committing necessarily to going through an application process. So IPALE, E-P-A-L-E, is a platform, it's a website, and it's a place where you can access resources, blog posts, information, all around adult education. So it's field specific, so it's for you. And that's leargas.ie/EPALE. You can register, you can sign up, and you can learn more about good examples, good projects, policy, events. So I think that's a really great place to go after today's event. The second place that I encourage you to think about is something called TCA, which is another acronym from Léargas, but really it's training events. And we have lots of training events for adult educators to participate in. I'll give you an example. In previous years, Denise on the call here would have been part of creating an opportunity for those working in prison education to get together. So people from across other member states came together on that particular thematic area. Then you can form partnerships, you can learn, you can share ideas. And I think that's something that we really like to facilitate, which is peer-to-peer learning. That's a big priority for us. So back to my point, there could be events and activities in 2022 in the area of adult education that could be suitable for you. So I think Gemma on the call, we will be promoting those events in 2022, and we may have some places for you to participate in an online training relevant to adult education, or indeed perhaps even a face-to-face event. It could be national or it could be at European level. So I just want to leave that with you. It doesn't just have to be about going straight into application stage. We strongly believe in bringing people on a journey and a path into the program. And I'd like to see more and more people from adult education try that out next year if you can. So that's it from me, really. In terms of the context setting, I wanted to set the context in terms of Léargas and who we are. And then in terms of adult education, we are really excited to see more happening in this area and to build on what we've achieved before. So that's it from me, Emma. I think I can pass back to you, and I really hope that you enjoy this hour and that you learn a lot and you listen to each other and you find places for maybe a kernel of an idea to develop.
Great, thank you very much, Dee. Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to have the opportunity to work with you again. And collaborate with our good friends at Léargas. So and thank you for that kind of overview there. And now I'm going to hand over to I think it's Jane or Gemma, I think, who are going to give a bit of an overview of what are the kind of opportunities that are available under adult education and inclusion. So over to you, Gemma.
Great, thanks, Emma. So I was thinking about sort of how much information to give you in these kind of short sessions. And I'm quite new to Léargas, so I'm meeting a lot of you for the first time. And I suppose I'm people on the call who know 10 times more than me about all of this. You've been managing projects for years, but there's also some people on the call who are completely new to this and don't yet know what we're talking about. So what I'm going to try and do is give you kind of a whistle-stop tour as to what are the programs, what's involved. For those of you that are experienced, you might pick up on some of the new things that have come in, and hopefully I won't bore you. And for those of you that are brand new to this, hopefully it will just give you that kind of overview. And I'll stick a bunch of links and follow-up stuff in the chat afterwards, so that if there is, something that you want to find out more about, we can chat about that afterwards. So I shall share my screen. No, I'm not allowed to share my screen. Can I have permission to do that?
Yeah, we'll get that for you now. 1 second.
There we go. And so hopefully that's working for people.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so, you know, Deirdre has already given us this brief overview of sort of what is Erasmus Plus and where does it all fit in. I suppose, you know, a lot of people hear Erasmus, they think of schools, maybe they think of students traveling, but there is that whole extra piece of the adult education and lots of other fields within it. And this is the new program that came in 2021. So, you know, things have changed from what was there from Erasmus Plus before. So when you hear people talking about it, there's lots of different priorities. When you actually read the program guide, and I will give you the link for that, you know, it goes into all of this about the power of European cooperation and lifelong learning and everything. And there's very specific priorities for different areas, including adult education. But these are ones I thought I should just share with you quickly, because these are the kind of overarching ones for this session of Erasmus Plus. So we've got the inclusion and diversity, which obviously is what we're talking about today. And you'll see that it's embedded throughout the program. It's all about how can we get more people to benefit from this. There's also a big focus on digital transformation. And, you know, we've all gotten thrown into that in the last 2 years with COVID and everything. So we've kind of fast forwarded on that. There's a big focus on the environment and climate change, and also just sort of participation and active citizenship within Europe and within your country. So they're kind of overarching priorities that feed through the whole program. So then when we look at it, there's kind of two main strands. So you'll hear this, and I bet you the girls later on and the people on the panel are going to be talking about this KA1 and KA2, which takes a while to get your head around. But basically, there's two kind of sides to the program. The first one is this piece about mobility. And whenever we hear mobility, that means movement. So it's people traveling to other countries, crisscrossing to share information and to learn from each other. And then the key action 2 is all about cooperation and partnerships and that kind of thing. So let's dig into them a little bit more. So for the key action 1, this is for all kinds of organizations. So probably a lot of you on the call will fit under this. I think what's important here is it's not just a formal adult education programs, but it's also that non-formal and informal piece. So all that good work that you're doing in your communities with adult learners. And then also the kind of coordinating bodies, the people who are not directly involved in adult education, but maybe are there as kind of supporting it to happen in different ways. So there's quite a wide range of who's there. And again, there is a specific list of eligible organizations on our website. So what can you do? What's it all about? So the two main streams, and Deirdre kind of touched on this already. So there's the staff side of things first. So if you've got staff who really want to develop their skills at adult education, develop their programs, develop your organizations, that's the side is for you. So you can do everything from job shadowing to actually going to teach and work in other organizations. You can take part in training courses. So there's lots of different ways where your staff can travel to other European countries to learn from other organizations and other people involved in the same work and to share that experience and that knowledge. There's also this piece about learning and mobility, which I think is quite new to the program. So that's that your adult learners can be the ones who can travel. They can travel individually or in groups, and those groups start with 2 people. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to take 20, you can take 2 to, you know, start with. And, you know, there's huge learning in that experience of traveling, and anyone who maybe has been involved in like youth exchanges over the years or those kind of things, they know that kind of power that it comes from it. So it's fantastic to see that this is now open to adult learners as well. The other pieces then are the incoming piece. So you can also invite an expert to come into your organization to help you, to, you know, train you, to work on a workshop, to, you know, go through different things. You can host teachers and educators who are training. So student teachers, student adult educators, they can come in and they can work with you and their support for that. And then that piece about preparatory visits, I think, is really important because, you know, if you're undertaking a learner mobility, if you're taking a bunch of adult learners abroad, you're not necessarily going to want to go into that blind. So you can go over, you can meet the people, you can see the accommodation, you can suss it all out, and there's support for that. So that's all the different bits. And, you know, this really is, you can start with just one thing. You can say, yeah, I'm going to send 2 of my staff on a training course for a week. They're going to go to Germany, they're going to learn loads and come back. And that's it. Or you can do some really complex project where somebody goes to job shadow and somebody else does a training course and then an inviting expert comes back. You know, this program can evolve with you and with what you want to do and what your goals are. And maybe if you just did that one thing where you just go on a training course for a few days, you might then make a load of contacts where you might decide the next year, okay, I'm going to work with that lady in Austria and that other person in Italy, and we're going to, you know, form a project together and we're going to share learning from each other. So it's all about that kind of building connections. But then the piece that people really want to know about is the money. So how does this, you know, what do we get for all this and how do we support all of this? So listen, I suppose the caveat here is these are little bits I've pulled out of the program guide, which is incredibly detailed and gives you all the information that you need. But this is just a kind of a summary of the kind of things that are supported and that help you to run these projects. So there's organization support there to help you just to run the overall project. I've written €100. It actually goes up a lot more than that. It depends on what activities you're doing and whether they're staff or learners and all kinds of things. But there's money there for just the general organization support to run the project. The travel costs are kind of a blanket, you know, from Tullamore to Amsterdam, what's the distance? And it's figured out that way. The individual support, so there's money there per person per day that covers food and accommodation. And again, that all kind of varies depending on where you're going and what you're doing. Those preparatory visits, so you get some kind of lump sum and it's up to you to get the best benefit out of that to go over and do your preparation. Your course fees if your staff are traveling. And then I suppose what we're actually getting onto today, which is this inclusion piece. So there is kind of a lump there of €100 per participant if those participants have fewer opportunities. There's a kind of a definition of what they consider fewer opportunities, and it includes lots of different people from different kinds of backgrounds. So that's there for your organization, and that kind of just acknowledges that extra work that goes in as an organization to support somebody and to sort of ensure that they are fully involved. There's then also inclusion support for the participants themselves. So this is a kind of a really specific thing, and I think Jane might probably go into this later on. But it covers those real costs that if you're saying, okay, well, I want to bring these adult learners, but this person has never traveled abroad before. They don't have a passport, they don't have a suitcase, they don't have a winter coat to go to Sweden in the snow, you know. So what kind of things do we need to literally make it happen to get that person able to travel? And they're really a case-by-case basis, you know, it's down to you to say, well, this is what we need and this is what it will cost. And they're all assessed kind of separately. And then there's also exceptional costs, which again, they're for more things. So maybe you have somebody who is living out on Cape Clear, and God bless them this week during the storms. You know, so that travel band where you measure from one distance to another, that's not going to cover the cost of getting their ferry over, and maybe the ferry doesn't go every day in the winter and all those extra complicated bits. So there's exceptional costs there, or if there's visas, or if there's different things, that's all kind of included. So that's just a really quick overview. As I said, there's way more detail in the program guide, but I know sometimes people just want to hear about what can I get? How can this work for me in my organization? So in terms of the deadlines, then the next deadline for these mobility projects is February 23rd. So it is coming up soon. It is one you want to start thinking about now. There's possibly going to be more deadlines later in the year, but that's the next one that's coming up. And I suppose then just a longer term piece to have in your head, if there are organizations here who have done these projects before, or maybe if you've, you know, kind of starting to get some ideas of what you might want to do, there's also this opportunity for accreditation. So that's not until October, there's no rush on that one, but if you want to start thinking about it, it's something that you can sort of, you put in a long-term plan for a few years and you say, here are all the different projects you might do. And once you become accredited, then it's a much simpler process each year to apply for the funds. So, you know, you could maybe start off with doing a short-term project this year and look to do accreditation in the following year or whatever, but these are all kind of options. So that's all the mobility ones, I know, whistle stop tour, but just to give you an idea of what's there. So then the other piece then is this KA2. So these are all of the kind of partnerships type programs. So this is much broader. You'll see this is any public or private organization. So it includes lots of people. And really, this is where you can kind of get creative. So you could have a few community organizations. You might want to partner with a business. You might want to partner with a research institute. Whatever your project is that you have in mind, you can bring a bunch of people together and you all bring your own expertise to make that happen. So there's kind of the bigger and the smaller scale ones, your cooperation partnerships and your small scale. And you'll see as we go through these, there's constantly this kind of two different layers of it. The cooperation ones are 3 organizations from 3 countries, and small scale are 2 from 2 countries. Again, you're looking at kind of a different length of time. Those small scale ones are a little bit shorter. There's loads of information as to sort of what they need to cover, what topics they should address, specifically relating to adult education, and also those kind of 4 that we mentioned earlier, the inclusion and the sustainability and all of that. And your project, they're wide open. They're very much there for you to create and make what you want them to be. So project activities that we've had before, we've had things like people developing a handbook on a particular topic, people developing online training courses, and doing research. You know, the support is there for you to have your partnership meetings where you travel to the partner countries and you all meet and you work on this plan together. There's support there for running training activities to implement what you've just created. So these partnership projects, they're very broad, but they're very kind of, you know, flexible, that you make them what you want them to be. And the funding for them is done in lump sums. So again, you'll see there's a big difference here between the small scale and the cooperation ones. So it's really up to you to sort of put that project plan in place and figure out what band you might fit into and work among that funding. And yeah, so there's kind of, some people love the mobility ones where it's like, okay, I get this much per person per activity and it all multiplies out. Some people love the flexibility of here's a lump sum and I can run with it. So it's a different kind of approach. And those deadlines are in March, so you have a little bit more time to think about those ones. So yeah, so February and March are your kind of 2 ones that are coming up for the 2 different types. As I said, whistle stop tour, okay, because we have way more important things to talk about this morning. But listen, here are all my details. I'll put my email into the chat now as well. And Léargas, we do run kind of workshops in preparation for all these, where you literally can bring a draft of your application form, we'll talk through all the different headings and the different categories, and we'll go through this in way more detail if you're interested in applying. So drop me a line, get on our mailing list, and we'll make sure that you know about all them. Check us out on social media. We have an amazing comms team who will make sure you'll know about any events coming up. So I think that's it. And as the girl said, I will be here. I'll hang around and I'll keep an eye on the chat. I may not know the answers to all your questions right now, because as I said, I'm only new to Léargas. But I will certainly take note of the questions and check out the answers and come back to you as soon as I can.
Great. Thank you so much, Gemma. That was excellent. Really good overview. And as an applicant to Léargas many times through the wheel, we can vouch for the quality of their support is just absolutely excellent. So yeah, absolutely reach out and use their resources and their trainings and sign up to all their newsletters and follow them on all the social media, because it's really just excellent quality information that you get, and it's always very friendly and helpful support, which makes a big difference when you're in the middle of a stressful application a lot of the time. So look, that's absolutely excellent. Thank you so much, Gemma. We're going to move on to the kind of panel section of today's session, and just to let everybody know, if they have questions throughout this process, throughout the panel session, they can just put them in the chat box. My colleagues Emily and Christina will keep an eye on it and will let me know if there's any questions coming in. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. And I'm probably going to start, I'll go to Jane first for a little bit of an overview of as Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Léargas, but I'll go ahead and introduce everybody now. So first off, we have Jane Carter, who is the Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Léargas. After that, then we have Dervla Lawless, who is the Head of Advocacy at AINTLIS, the National Adult Learning Organisations. She designs and leads advocacy campaigns, evidence-based policy submissions, and is responsible for political and stakeholder engagement at Léargas. She has over 10 years of experience in EU projects, including the European Agenda for Adult Learning in Ireland, and she is currently undertaking her PhD at Maynooth University in the area of adult and community education. So we're delighted to have Dervla here today. We also have Owen Nash, who is currently the Manager of Arts and Creative Arts Therapies with COPE Foundation and the Chair of the European Association of Service Providers for People with a Disability in the Members Forum on Arts and Culture. In his role at COPE Foundation, Owen manages a team of people that work locally, nationally and internationally to realise Article 30 of the United Nations Convention of Rights for People with Disabilities, And then we also have Denise Shannon, who recently has taken up a post with the adult literacy organizer at CDETB, so South Inner City Dublin Education and Training Board. Prior to that, she worked at Léargas with strategic responsibility for the implementation of Erasmus Plus and its predecessor programs, and for the field of adult education. She has a particular interest in how the EU policy shapes the work of adult education in addressing educational inequality. So as I said, I was going to go to Jane first and just maybe ask a little bit about, how is inclusion and diversity prioritized in Erasmus Plus programs? What does that actually look like? And what are the big priorities?
Thanks very much, Emma. I think following on from Gemma's lovely presentation, I think she's covered so much of it there. But I think a good thing to note is that adult education, we recognise that in its nature is inclusive by providing a second chance for education for people, and Erasmus Plus can support that. So people make the most out of this opportunity and enhance their learning and experience. But inclusion for adult education, yeah, I think the introduction of learner mobility in the most recent programme is massive, and supporting people to take up that opportunity by providing either preparatory visits or things that are entrenched within the programme, but also financial supports to make that a reality as well. Yeah, I think should cover it for now. Thanks.
Okay, no worries. Okay, what we'll do then is, I suppose I might go on to Dervla then first. So Dervla, as AINTIS is very much, kind of a policy leader in Ireland in all areas of adult education. So what, I suppose, role do you see programs like Erasmus Plus playing in driving inclusion, specifically in adult education? And I suppose, how does the EU policy align with the national policy in this area?
Thanks, Emma. I suppose from my perspective, from AINTIS's perspective, Erasmus Plus programs in European policy has played a significant role in fostering community education and adult learning in Ireland. It sets out key themes underneath social inclusion. So it specifically encourages projects to focus on supporting target groups such as people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and people who are long-term unemployed, older learners, or people with disabilities. And it provides examples of best practice. It allows people to conduct research to help shape and inform our understanding. And it also provides, those opportunities mentioned today, like capacity building, and then a collection of resources. So all of this gives specific direct funding to community education providers, to ETBs, to different organizations. And it allows them to work with groups while being funded to act on social inclusion, which is obviously really important and significant in our country. And I think in AINTIS, through our European work, everything we do specifically addresses educational disadvantage, and everything focuses on creating social change. So the EU policy, from what I've seen even now more so at that level, working directly with the Commission, it completely shapes and influences Irish policy, and it makes sure that Irish policy recognises the importance of social inclusion, and it gives direct targets and activities for it to be able to do that. And I suppose one of my favourite experiences from the last year, even as an example of this kind of work, was we developed an advocacy series underneath our Learners as Leaders programme. And we did this in partnership with a group of learners in the Cope Foundation, where Owen works, with the Ability Board in Cork. And that group of learners co-designed the programme with us. We looked at communications, advocacy, public speaking, things like that. And then they went on to develop a campaign called Nothing About Us Without Us, where they spoke up for their own issues and their own needs as a group. They created a democracy exhibition that we turned into a video because of the online circumstances. And then they also spoke at an international event as well. And that was just one activity that we managed to do, supporting one particular group, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, great. Excellent. It's a really nice example, I think, and a very interesting point that, the priorities at EU level match and complement and are inform those that are at national level. Because I think sometimes people can see them as quite separate, and that, we're busy with our own national priorities here. and the EU has their priorities, but actually they're one and the same is I think what you were saying there. So that's excellent. And then I suppose, seeing as you mentioned Owen, we'll go on to Owen next. So that sounded like a very interesting project there. So maybe you can tell us a little bit, Owen, about, I suppose, your role at Cope Foundation. Maybe you can reference that project, and also the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities.
Yeah, so hello everybody. I'm the manager of Arts and Creative Arts Therapies with Cope Foundation. So I would kind of manage a small team there. I think some of it was outlined earlier. But we're effectively involved in local, national and international project work, which promotes the rights of persons with intellectual disabilities in terms of access to arts and culture, engagement. And because arts and culture is such a cross-cutting kind of tool, it's, you know, it's early intervention, it's adult education, it's, you know, it's well-being, it crosses all aspects of life. We're really involved in implementing that. But coming back to some of the points that others made too, like the idea of policy coming from European level and impacting locally, I'll talk a little bit about how that plays through in terms of our projects as well. But we've been involved in a number of Erasmus Plus projects, both as a partner and as a lead agency. And we've also been involved in youth exchanges. So some of our experiences about actually like coming from the person's experience. And one of the key things that we always try to ensure is that people that are accessing our service are directly involved in the projects, that they're represented throughout the projects. And we're very key on ensuring that this kind of representative democracy approach is taking place throughout it and that it's rights-based. So as highlighted, our work is led and kind of framed within the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And more recently, the European Commission has published its most recent policy document on disability rights called the European Strategy on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that leads me into my work then with the EASPD, which is the European Association for Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. And that network represents about 20,000 disability service provider organizations across the European Union. And I'm on the board with that, with a portfolio for arts and culture. And again, using arts and culture and adult education within the arts as a tool for really highlighting disability issues and working through that. So I leave it there for now before I ramble on too much.
Not at all, you're grand, Owen. We'll come back to you again for sure. But I did just want to loop in Denise as well. So Denise, you mentioned or I mentioned there when I was introducing you that, you know, you had this special interest in how EU policy links with kind of adult education at local level, I suppose. So maybe you can kind of tell us a little bit about that, about, I suppose, what do you think are the similarities between the EU level and the national level and the local level?
I suppose more broadly, when I think about Erasmus and inclusion, it's building on predecessor programs that are informed by policy. And at a European level, cooperation in education has been around since the 70s, and they focused on things like migrant education, intercultural education, and disability, particularly with school children. That was in the early days. And then it broadened out then into vocational education, and then later with Socrates in the 80s, the idea of second chance education first appeared in policy as a result of the UNESCO Learning to Be. And that filtered then into, I suppose, nation state policies. That concept of second chance education and adult education being a distinct field of practice as opposed to vocational education, which is more focused on the workplace and skill development. So that piece has always been kind of, I suppose, informing our national policy, you know, and the cooperation between member states on education underpins all of the programs. And Grundtvig, the Grundtvig program, the lifelong learning program, gave that distinct piece of the program to adult education, the cooperation, the sharing of practice between organizations across Europe around issues pertinent to adult education and learners. And our white paper on adult education, the first one in our state, was informed by lifelong learning. And that is fundamentally why the white paper happened, was this notion of lifelong learning that which came from Europe, shaped our white paper on adult education in 2000. So there's very much so a connection there between the European and the national and the local, and how we talk about education, how we understand adult education. And I suppose what's really important about the programs is it gives that space for adult education as a field of practice, that people recognize that what we're doing in adult education is providing bespoke learner-centered opportunities. We're supporting learners back into education who have had a negative experience of education. It's very learner-centered. You're constantly in a space where you're innovating and trying to develop approaches that will work, that will engage learners and support them positively and have them realize confidence. And I suppose in the programs, it has been hugely beneficial for practitioners to share and connect with these wider communities of practice, because I suppose from an ETB perspective, it has been hugely beneficial for particularly in Key Action 1. And I suppose in terms of Erasmus Plus since 2014, to take an organisational approach as opposed to an individual approach, which was under the Grundtvig programme. Individual staff went away on European courses. Now it's an organisational perspective. So you're thinking about your staff going away, what they bring back, how they connect that to communities of practice within your organisation, and then how those communities of practice within your own organisation connect with wider communities across Europe. So in terms of, I suppose, what happened in Erasmus is there has been staff mobilities connecting into European networks like the European Basic Skills Network, the Distance Learning Networks, there's a Adults Learning Maths Network. So there's all of these professional networks where staff have the opportunity to share, to contribute to research, to really spotlight on what's happening here, to gain confidence themselves as practitioners as well. So that's, some of the highlights of it.
So yeah, you can see there that it's not just that, they're connected, they're very much there's almost a loop kind of relationship that the EU policy directly informed how, the whole field of adult education here in Ireland. So it's very much interconnected, and that's something that I think, again, speaking to people who are interested in EU projects all the time here at the Wheel through our Access Europe programme, which I'll mention a little bit more about later, they sometimes have this idea that it's so separate, that's EU, that's separate. But we can see there from the various inputs from our panelists that it's definitely very interconnected, and what's happening at local level is relevant at EU level. Yeah, excellent points there from everybody around policy. I did want to just move on. I might go back to Dervla for a minute, just about, I suppose, the specific value of projects. So, we've looked at the kind of overall policy side of things and what's the value of them from an adult education policy perspective. But then as an organization, so Dervla, you've managed many European funded projects, including this European Agenda for Adult Learning in Ireland. So I suppose from an organizational point of view, what's the value of these projects, and how have they helped to drive inclusion in your own organization? And I suppose as AINTIS is the national kind of representative body for adult learning, or for adult learning in Ireland, what kind of value have you seen them have on organizations working in adult education?
Thanks, Emma. If you hear any noise disruption, my dog is having an absolute conniption outside the door that she's not allowed to right now. So
she has opinions about
background noise.
Yeah. Okay.
As you said, Emma, AINTIS is the national coordinator for the European Agenda for Adult Learning. So I suppose in that space, the European Agenda is an EU policy which funds programs, and specifically a national coordinator in each country across the EU. So all those national coordinators work together, and our role involves supporting the implementation of European adult learning policy in Ireland. And I suppose that also means that we get to be strategic about the work that we do, and we're also responsive. We're able to act really quickly. Like in my previous role was the EU Projects Officer. And one example last year was the Black Lives Matter movement, or was the year before, where we saw this amazing, important campaign taking place. And I said, let's do something. So we organized an event and brought speakers together, people of color, to be able to address that issue and support people to be able to take part. And I suppose in that, like, our current project is adult and community education supported learner pathways. And as I said, it works in a huge range of issues and activities. Another example was we recognized that the RPL, or recognition of prior learning, was a big gap in the community education sector specifically. And that's just because of a lack of funding and national policy for those groups on the ground. So we said, right, let's step up and do something to support this and engage adult learners to have those opportunities. So we developed an accredited level 7 program in partnership with UCC and delivered that this year. And it was free for all the educators who took part. They got free professional development. And then moving on from that, we're now delivering a case study with Limerick Community Education Network, which is just wrapping up at the moment. We'll take that piece of learning, we'll then share that with other community education providers. And then we're starting a community of practice next year, specifically on RPL for all those people who undertook the program. And then in that space, from a national level, we'll be able to hopefully address the gap in the sector, strategically building on this piece by piece. And I think in other kind of areas where it might be relevant is to say, for example, like the Learners as Leaders program that I mentioned, that's something that we started up or kind of formalized more in the current project. And 3 programs or series that we ran underneath this. One was focused on peer mentoring for adult learners to be able to support each other, particularly important in the current context. Another was on the advocacy piece that I mentioned. And then the latest one was on the STG. So really supporting that focus on development education. We also then had a conference just last week, was it? Can't even remember what day it is these days. And that specifically focused on lifelong learning and educational disadvantage. So we were able to once again directly address educational inclusion. And in that space, we held a panel where we wanted to make sure we were giving a space to representative voices from marginalized communities. So the panel had 5 speakers. And for example, there was a person of color on this panel. There was someone who was a member of the traveller community. There was someone who's representing older learners. Like, we were really just trying to make sure that those communities had the space to share their voice and to be able to address the needs. And then within that, again, I think it's nice because it kind of has these layers. So you're working directly with groups, you're working directly with learners, but then we also work directly with the Commission. We meet all the national coordinators and the ministries from across Europe. So we're able to highlight the needs of the people on the ground. And as an NGO, obviously that's particularly important as an advocacy one. But then on a national level, we're working with the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. I'm very proud of myself for getting that one out there correctly. and then state bodies like SOLAS, QQI, ETBI, etc. So it means that, like, you're also then using the learning that you've had and working with the people on the ground to then feed back to the government and to the Commission and say, look, this is what the needs of the people are. This is what the inclusion issues are. And then you're supporting that kind of peer learning space across Europe to be able to directly implement it and kind of drive that space forward. It's an excellent, honestly, I love it, piece of adult learning policy. And they've just announced as well that it's going to continue on. So we're really excited about that.
Great, excellent. I think one very interesting point there is the kind of agility and responsiveness point. There's very few programs that allow you to do that, you know. So there's something very special about European programs there that they do, especially for the NGO sector, that you know, that there's this open, transparent program that allows you to apply and to implement things on the ground. Whereas sometimes if you're trying to do that solely at national level, that could be very difficult. So there's something there about, I suppose it kind of helps to lend to that independent voice of civil society as well, because it allows you to take on topics, to challenge things, to challenge policy at national level as well. So there's something very kind of special about that. So I suppose, Owen, just to come on, I'm going to ask you a similar question here about what's the value of these Erasmus Plus adult education projects from an organizational perspective, because as I said, we've looked at the policy and it is great. It's very important that we're all engaging in this, but you know, as an organization, as a busy organization providing services, what's the value of engaging in these types of projects, especially when it comes to inclusion?
I think Deirdre said at the start that the programs are about people, partnerships and programs. And I think that's really key for us. As I said, we've been involved in a range of programs, but when we think if it's learner-centered or person-centered, what value then can we get both as an organization, but for the people that we're there to support too. So some of our experiences have been, like many of the people we support may be pushed into poverty as a result of disability. And programs like this allow people to move internationally. It's allowed people to travel to different countries, sometimes for the first time ever. People have never left their county, and meet with a broad range of people from right across the European Union. I think like that might be underestimated, but it's really a central point for that opportunity for people to travel, see different places that might be very kind of typical for other parts of the population. The other thing I think is that having the learner's voice represented is really critical, and we've seen that in our programs. So the idea of representative democracy and people themselves contributing into the programs or into the outputs of the programs. And the results of that then is that we develop further understanding and we support and enable advocacy and the voice of those learners. And by doing that, we can create change. So our projects that have always included the learner as central. So we have brought people with us on trips, ensured their voices are central to the outputs. But our programs, one which kind of I've led, and two which we've partnered in, have been highlighted to the European Parliament as examples of good practice. So they've been brought to the European Parliament. And we've been able to use the research as well that we've gained and the project outputs that we've gained to lobby the Commission for change, in particular from the voice of the people we support and bringing those outputs directly to impact policy. And I know that even in developing this new program for Erasmus Plus with Denise Shannon in a previous job, that we did get to go to, with the support of Léargas, get to go to consultations in advance of this new program and really represent those voices and the changes that are wanted. And we can see those now. We can see those changes in this program where learner mobility are much more integrated and funding to actually support the learners rather than the staff, but really integrating the voice. And I think that's really key. But just to finalize, just one or two other points. When we were kind of lobbying or kind of voicing concerns about the previous European disability strategy, we were able to bring the learning we had from our Erasmus Plus programs into that. And we were able to directly impact on the new European disability rights strategy with the results and the information and research that we got from our projects, our Erasmus Plus projects. So we weren't just giving kind of anecdotal evidence, but we were bringing our information loaded with European funding and what that resourced us to discover. And that really made an impact. So arts, the word arts was never even mentioned in the previous European disability strategy. And now there's a designated kind of 5.5 of the new strategy is specifically mentioned. And I would say that the Erasmus Plus programs enabled us to go loaded with information about some of the gaps that existed, that we highlighted with that funding. And we were able to bring that then to the Commission and highlight those. So not only was it working at a local level, allowing people to engage and augment their voices, but their voices were heard at an international level. And I think that's really critical to be able to connect the voice of the people. I'll just come quickly back to the idea of the stakeholders and the impact of the projects, again, highlighting that the policy changes as a result of people power can be really carried through this project if it's managed properly. And I think if it is managed properly and the impact is there, it's critical that those people who have people that they're supporting or in their learning systems that want to have their voices heard, that they can use this system, because just like you, like we're an organization that enables people, and we've used this as an enabling tool to have their voices heard at local, national and international level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a massive impact to having an organization, for you to have had an international impact. You know, so that's the possibilities, I suppose, of this program, is that you can take your work and scale it up to that international level and have an impact that you probably never would have imagined before without the ability or the opportunities, I should say, of Erasmus Plus. Denise, I'm going to come back to you again, kind of sticking with that organizational perspective. I suppose you spent a long time in Léargas working with organizations. So what difference have you seen it make, I suppose, strategically to an organization? How have you seen it kind of transform an organization, Erasmus Plus, I should say, and now working in the field yourself in CDETB, what kind of plans do you have for how you're going to use Erasmus Plus to develop your organization now?
I suppose fundamentally what it gives organizations working in adult education, we know this from provision, that you have very little time for reflection. Yeah. You have very little time to take a step back and actually re-energize and take stock of what's going on with your practice, with your organization, and really how you meet the needs of your learners. So Erasmus and predecessor programs have allowed and given that space to people, and that's fundamentally what people come back with. They talk about the space to actually reflect, talk with people that are working across different but similar, you know, in similar ways and with similar learners, even though they're different actors. And that is, you know, the space where you can innovate, where you can share on practices and approaches, where you can develop new ones, where you can actually address the real challenge of trying to meet learners' needs in adult education, which requires a distinctive, you know, approach, an approach that's tailored, and that's complex work. And there's very little time to do that in, you know, organizations that are, you know, trying to deliver every day and are financially stretched. So it's a really, really important space, and it's really important that the programs continue to keep that space for adult education, that adult education as a field of practice has that piece, you know, has that identity, and that practitioners can recognize each other in terms of their ethos and the philosophy that underpins how they work every day with learners. So for organizations like the ETBs and other smaller organizations that are working into adult education, the space to actually have that and connect it into their strategic plans or their vision for their organizations, which is really, really important in terms of the European programs, not to make it an add-on, that it's fundamentally part of what you're doing. It's an integrated piece, and Owen expresses it so well there. I'm delighted he's here today to talk about his project, because it is about having the learners at the center. It is about using the European dimension to actually add to your work, to support your work, to bring it to another level. And that doesn't mean necessarily a bigger project. It can just mean a project that is really meaningful and actually can be embedded into your daily practice. I mean, if you can achieve that, that is a success. And I suppose for projects applying, or for people thinking about project ideas, think about the need first. Don't think about the European priorities. Start with the need for your project, and you'll never go far wrong if you're thinking about your learners at the center of that, your practitioners working with those learners. Then you will find your way, and you will, you know, have a project that's of really good quality and of value to you, that you can really embed in your organization.
100%. I know the Wheel has very much had that experience. We're coming at it from a vocational education and training side of things, but certainly, you know, starting with what have our members identified as a need, and working from there has always kind of, you know, worked well for us. So I'm going to go ahead. We're coming up on time now, so I'm going to ask all of my panelists to briefly answer this next question. So just to give everybody just a last chance, you know, a lot of listeners who are listening in today and who will be listening back to the recording of this will be deciding whether to start or to scale up their Erasmus Plus adult education activity. So I suppose, what would be your message to them? It can be a piece of advice, it can be a note of inspiration, whatever you like. So I will come to Dervla first. So what's your message to our listeners, Dervla?
3 quick points. Find an example of a really good project to learn from it. Be a partner first, and building a team is paramount. Make sure that you have good relationships and take the time to build them.
Excellent and very succinct. Thank you, Dervla. So Owen, I'm going to come to you for the same question.
I think programs like this help you to look outwards, connect with other people. I think like beyond critical. I think it enables active citizenship at a European level. And as our country becomes more culturally diverse, we can reach out into communities within the European context and learn more about cultural diversity from so many other groups within our European community. So again, I would say reach out, go for it, don't be afraid. And as Denise was saying earlier, look at the needs first. And I think that will keep you guided as to your way forward.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you, Owen. And then finally, I'm going to come back to Denise. So what's your piece of advice or your piece of inspiration, or what would you say to people who are thinking about getting started or scaling up?
Getting started, don't be afraid to start small. That first step, a TCA, I think Deirdre mentioned it earlier, those conferences, the international conferences are a brilliant way to get started. Make sure you get on with your partners. Those relationships are so important. If you don't get on with your partners, you're not going anywhere. Keep your learner at the center, keep your eye on the needs, and get support of your staff and your organization, and make sure that you're not on this journey alone. That would be my key pieces.
Absolutely. All very, very good advice. So I'm going to come back then as well to Léargas and just ask, so I don't know whether I'm going to Jane or Gemma, maybe you can put up a hand, whichever one it is, just to kind of ask, so Jane, any kind of, just give you a chance to any final comments from the Léargas perspective, but also maybe to mention some of the supports and things like that are available.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd like to mention the supports in the application phase or before you start your project, that we run application workshops, ideas labs, and facilitate networking events as well. So Léargas has a highly supportive approach to that. Inclusion and diversity, or including people with fewer opportunities, is a priority in the application process too. So that would be rewarded for that. Also then, when you're delivering a project, there's financial supports available, and Gemma and myself are available throughout if you have any questions. But yeah, just to, I suppose, mirror what the panelists have said there, that to reflect on the needs of your organization and your learners, and to reach out to us, and we'll help you in any way that we can. Dee also mentioned the Appale website as well, which would be worth having a look at, and keep an eye on our training events too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Well, we are going to move on. We're going to do a bit of a Q&A, and people, our Léargas people will stay on the line and will answer questions. We have about 30 minutes for that after this, but just before we get stuck into that, and there's already one question in the chat there, I do just want to thank all of the panelists in case anybody has to run off now. So Dervla Lawless, Owen Nash, and Denise Shannon, we're just absolutely delighted to have you, and thank you so much for your time and for your expertise and for sharing your excellent insights. And it was just fantastic to learn about all of your work and your projects. So thank you very, very much. But yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to move on to the next bit. So we've actually already got a question that's come up here, and I'm not sure who in Léargas is the best person to answer this, but we have Liam O'Cally has said, is there an element of this programme that could support PhD candidates, or could this be part of the Wheel/Civic Society brief? So I don't know which Léargas person would be best placed to answer that. Sorry, and that's Liam there. Yeah.
Or maybe somebody could even just point me in the right direction. You know, I think I'm not in the right area here.
Okay.
I remember something at a Wheel get together a year ago. I caught the tail end of it. I know there was something about civic society supporting research, education, and things like that. You know, so it mightn't be this element of, you know.
I know that there is certain programs that will support. I don't know whether they would support PhD candidates. There's certainly kind of EU programs that support researchers in their ongoing career. So there's things like the Marie Curie-Skłodowska actions, or Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, I should say, that are run through the IUA. There's a national contact point there. But I don't know whether they would support PhD candidates. It's usually people who are, recently finished their PhD and are going on
into the system.
Their research career. So I'm not sure. Now, what I can do is, I mean, if you email me the question, I can ask around. Maybe it was a different colleague within the wheel that was running that event, and I can send it around and see, what where this might have come from, and what, if there's any information out there. Absolutely. But I'll
email you. I'll get in touch.
Yeah, so it's just emma@wheel.ie if you want to email me, and we can see there's bound to be somebody in the wheel that knows about it. But I know that certainly from the Léargas perspective, there isn't support for PhD candidates, as far as I know, if that's correct. Yeah, okay, I'm getting some nods. So
yeah, Derval commented there that you can use that KA1, that mobility, if that fits in, if that person is themselves a staff member, it fitting in somewhere. But I suppose the other piece is that partnership piece. Again, it's not really focused on individuals, it's more on organizations, but maybe with a particular institute or college or something, there could be some kind of a partnership opportunity there.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah,
that was very helpful. Perfect.
Okay, what we have is we actually have somebody from, we have a couple of people who contacted us today who've been very active in adult learning projects. We have Alex and Kathleen from FIPL, and there they are. Okay, so hi, Alex. So I know you had some slides, but I don't know whether we'll have time to go through all of them, but if you wanted to show a couple of them and just give us a little bit of an overview of your projects, and as some examples, I suppose, for people here today, and also things that might be of interest to them. And if people have questions, if they want to take some time to think about what questions they might have for our Léargas representatives here today, they can be having a think about that while you tell us a little bit about your project. So I think it's Alex, is it? Not Kathleen, but yeah.
No, it's Kathleen. So.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, okay. Great. So Kathleen, when you're ready.
Just need to unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry. I couldn't
no, sorry. Kathleen, you just need to unmute.
Do we have Kathleen here? I just wanted to check. Oh.
Yeah, we're just having technical difficulties. Apologies.
Okay, while you're doing that, then we might just, there's already one question that's come up. I have a question. Is there an adult learning in science network?
Okay, ready. Yeah.
Okay, so we might just get you, Kathleen, we might get you to just hold on for 1 second, because I'm just going to pose that question to Léargas. So adult learning in science network, would this be something that might exist in a PALI, or? So I don't know who at Léargas should be answering that one.
Well, I don't know the answer, so unless Jane does, but I can certainly look into it.
No, but yeah, if we can. I can't see who's asked that question actually. Sinead.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can take that, and Jen will probably get back to you with an answer soon.
Great. Okay, so we'll get back to you on that one. Thank you for that, Sinead. Okay, so Kathleen, do you want to? I don't know.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, the connection.
Can you hear me okay?
Bad. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. We're calling from FIPL here in Virginia in County Cavan. It's a family-run business working with Erasmus programs. So it's, for me, I've been here for 3 months. I'm a community facilitator. So in the last 3 months, I've learned a lot about Erasmus programs, and I'm very excited to say that it's very, very interesting. I see where a lot of adult learners, especially, fall these ways. Yeah.
Kathleen, I think your internet connection is a little bit bad, or is it just me? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah,
it's coming up as unstable. So
yeah, okay. What we can do is if you want to, we can absolutely send your slides around. If we'll send that in the follow-up email to everybody who registered. If you wanted to put in, feel free to put in some points there in the chat box there about your projects and things like that, and any information that you want to include in the follow-up, just because it starts off well, but then it goes a little bit fuzzy and it kind of falls off. So apologies for that. I don't know if it's going to, I don't think we have a stable enough connection. Okay, no worries. But we will include everything in the follow-up. But good to hear. We heard the beginning there that you were fully endorsing Erasmus Plus projects, so that's great. And obviously getting a lot out of them. So yeah, we'll make sure to include all of that information in the follow-up. So sorry about that.
Not at all. But you know, it's just lots to tell and lots of good stories from here today.
Great. Okay, well, that's good. And as I said, we will include that in the follow-up. So just another question that's come up. So I recently completed a pilot project called Silver Science, teaching the elderly generation about science. So, okay, that's from Sinead again. So that's excellent. I don't know, is that through an Erasmus Plus project or a different type of project, but that sounds very interesting, and certainly in line with a lot of the things that we've heard about today around inclusion. And I know that intergenerational learning, lifelong learning, all that kind of stuff is very popular within Erasmus Plus. So that's great. So we give, if anybody else has any chance or any questions that they want to ask, please do put them in the chat box now, and we'll make sure to get to them. If there's anything else, then I suppose, is there, for Jane and Gemma, you said you'd follow up about the science, but I do think on the APALI platform, there is things, kind of groups that you can join that are specific to different topics. I think that's right, is there?
Yeah, so there's lots. I mean, APALI is huge and it's Europe-wide. So there's probably a discussion forum on any topic you can come up with really there. And there's also examples of projects that have taken place in the past, which might kind of give you some inspiration, and opportunities to make contacts if you were trying to organize a project or join an existing project, that you can kind of find out who's involved and that kind of thing.
Yeah, great. I wanted to see as well, so another one came up. How does an organization such as MABS who gets state funding avail of funding/training? Is it through partnerships? That's from Joan Evans. So maybe Gemma, I'll put that to you, will I?
Yeah, so I mean, it can be through the partnerships or it could be through the mobilities, depending on what the topic is really, you know. So if they were trying to go off on a training course, I suppose the main thing is that if you're applying through the adult education, there has to be a link back to adult education. So you have to be able to show how adult learners are going to benefit from this. So it's not just, I personally want to go off on this course, you know, it has to sort of have some kind of link back into the overall program.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just wondering where the space would be for an agency who gets direct funding from the state, but how they would actually. So a lot of our initiatives will be community education on the ground with financial literacy, education, and initiatives that way. So we're just wondering, is there opportunities where the community may look at adult education in money management and be able to get funding from yourselves or via yourselves?
I think in general that does sound good. I'll send you the link here, Joe, for the list of eligible organisations, and you can just see if that would line up with yourselves. But I mean, yeah, that whole idea of financial literacy is really important. So
yeah, and to everybody, a great morning, very insightful.
Thank you very much, Joe. I would say, like, from my own experience, all kinds of organizations are eligible for Erasmus Plus program funding. So whether they're even a public authority that's fully state funded can avail of Erasmus Plus funding, and you know, and non-profit organizations, private organizations, academia, and actually an ideal European partnership in many ways would have all of those various stakeholders, you know, to show the different perspectives. So, like, for example, we're in a project now where we're cooperating with a university, a municipality, and in Europe, and then we obviously as a non-profit organization, you know, so there's nothing barring your eligibility as far as I know anyway. But Gemma's just posted the list of eligible organizations there, so you can have a look, and certainly if you have a project idea around that, if you have a specific idea around financial literacy, which I think is really good and kind of links in a lot with the adult education kind of priorities around I suppose, basic education, kind of life skills type education, then absolutely link in with Léargas. Obviously, we can help as well at the wheel if necessary. And because I think that's a really good idea. And, you know, if you link in with Léargas, they can help you place, okay, you know, based on what you want to do, what type of project is this? You know, where do you need to be applying, kind of thing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so that's actually, yeah, great. That was a really good point, Joe, because I was going to ask, did anybody else have specific projects in mind that they wanted to kind of
well, I'm thinking maybe like digital literacy was mentioned earlier on before, especially with community education and different groups in terms of developing whatever skill it is, digitally, and training through digital as well. We all are concerned with. Obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we at the wheel, now again, this was a vocational education and training project because we were focused at staff of the non-profit sector. So we, when you're looking at staff, you're looking at a vocational education and training project. When you're looking at kind of non-professionals, it's an adult education project. But we were able to create a whole kind of digital learning platform that we use at the wheel for our basic courses. So like, you know, the basics in governance, the basics in fundraising and communications and things like that. So, and again, we would never have been able to do that without Erasmus Plus funding. That's a real example of something that had been a strategic objective for a long time that got fast tracked because of this funding, that we were able to identify a need, and you know, within 2 years we had delivered and kind of realized this project because of that. And you know, had we not had that, I'd say it would still be on the strategic objectives list, and we'd be still trying to work towards it. So yeah, okay.
Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. Is there anybody else who might have an idea for a project that they'd like to kind of feel out or run by? Any of the Léargas people here today? So feel free to unmute yourselves if you like. If there are no questions, we can finish up a little bit earlier than we thought, unless there's anything else, but I don't want to cut anybody off if they did have something that they wanted to ask. So, okay, look, I'm going to go ahead and finish or share a couple more slides just about this our Access Europe program, just as information. However, if you do think of any questions, do just interrupt or jump in, or we can make time for them at the end. So if you want to type anything in, this is your last chance, because we'll finish up now and let everybody go a little bit early if there's no more questions. So just to note that if you do need to reach out for help, the Wheel has a program called Access Europe. That's myself and my two colleagues, Emily and Christina, here today. We run this program. So we provide all kinds of wraparound EU funding support for the non-profit sector in Ireland. So this means that maybe if your project doesn't belong within Erasmus Plus, and it's more of an Interreg project, or it's more of a Peace Plus project, we can help you find a home within all of the different European programs that are out there. We can help find a home for your project, or tell you whether it's whether EU funding is the right avenue for it. So we work very closely with the national contact points, as we mentioned earlier on today. So Léargas are absolutely the experts in Erasmus Plus. So if your project sounds like Erasmus Plus, we will refer you exactly to them. But maybe if it does sound more like an Interreg project, we can signpost you on to one of the regional assemblies who are in charge of those kind of projects. So we're kind of a central hub that we signpost people to the relevant national contact point. And we also provide kind of wraparound supports. So things like we research all of the different EU funding programs and deadlines that are out there for the sector across all the different programs, and we condense them into a nice kind of easy to scan newsletter. And you can get that delivered for free to your inbox once a month. So that saves a hell of a lot of research. If you're interested in EU funding programs, definitely sign up for that, because anybody who's ever tried to research programs will tell you that it's a bit of a labyrinth and it can be very challenging. So let us do that kind of legwork for you and make it easy for you to just scan what's out there. We also do free trainings and events like this one. So we can bring in national contact points, or we can bring in other consultants, or we provide training on things like grant writing and project management, stuff like that. kind of the wraparound supports that are needed for all types of projects. So definitely, again, sign up to our updates for that so that you can get information about our free training and events. We also provide one-to-one advice, application support, and signposting. So as I said, we signpost you to the relevant national contact point. But we can meet with you, hear about what are your goals with EU funding, what would you like to achieve, and help you to kind of plot, you know, what's the best programs for you to be looking at, and who should you be in contact with, and how to kind of start developing your organization at EU level. And then we can also, given enough notice, do application review and things like that. We also do networking opportunities locally and at EU level. So this is, again, I think I mentioned it there, that, you know, an ideal consortium has various stakeholders in it. So it's about connecting different sectors here in Ireland and providing opportunities for them to meet and to plan projects together, which is definitely challenging in the current COVID environment, but also at EU level. So we've actually, we will be launching on Monday officially at an event, which I will tell you about now in a second, our EU partner database. So this is where Irish organizations can create a profile for their organization on our database. It lets you explain who you are, what kind of things you're interested in terms of projects, what kind of areas you work in, and what your goals are with EU funding, what kind of strengths you can bring to a project, all of those kind of things. And we will have then a database of Irish organizations that are ready and willing when it comes to EU funding, which we will then market to Europe. So we'll be promoting that throughout the various national agencies and contact points and networks throughout Europe, in the hope that more and more Irish organizations will be invited into projects. Because I think, as several of our panelists said, that can be often the best way to get started in EU projects, is to be invited in and to gradually build your network and your capacity before jumping in as a coordinator. So yeah, that's an exciting new development. And I wanted to mention that we have our showcase on, so this is where we'll be officially launching our new website, our new EU funding guide, and our partner database on Monday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Yeah, we'll be launching that. It's free. Please attend, learn all about it, and there'll be lots of examples of successful projects and things like that to get you inspired. So that's taking place on Monday. But just to note, if you do want to reach out to the Access Europe team, it's myself and my colleagues Emily and Christina who are here. That's our website. Follow us on Twitter, and you can reach out to us at europe@wheel.ie. So that's it. And just to note that Access Europe is funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs. Yeah, that's really it. So I don't think there are any other questions. We've had a couple of just links shared, a list of eligible K1 projects, that's fine. Very good, inclusivearts.eu as well. So look, that's great. If there are no more questions, we can leave it there. I have to say a big thank you to my Léargas representatives that are here. And just to say another big thank you, I suppose, to all the participants for taking part. Please do reach out if you have any questions. We'll definitely circulate the information about FIPL as well in Virginia. And there was some great slides there. So unfortunately, we didn't get to, the internet wasn't cooperating, but we will definitely circulate them. So definitely have a look at those as examples of successful projects and what projects look like in practice and the impact that it might be able to have on your organization. So we'll include that in the follow-up. But yeah, a big, huge thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And hopefully we'll see you again soon on Monday at our event. So thanks very much, everybody.